Good morning. Welcome back to Passionate World Radio Network. To become successful, one must put themselves in the paths of a giant. Passionate World Radio Network. And this morning at 11 o'clock on Lillian's Interviews, we'll be interviewing the author of Penny. Hands I Passed Through, Things I Saw, Stories I Can Tell. Written by Peter Davidson. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Good morning, Lillian. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I am delighted that you're here. I read your book, and I really think that you say it really very well when you ask people, have you ever looked at a coin in the palm of your hand and wonder where it has been, what is seen and heard, and what stories it could tell? So what motivated you to write a book about the universal penny?
You know, the comment that you made is exactly the thing that gave me the idea. Through the years, every now and then, my wife or I would look at a coin we received in change and would say, gosh, if this coin could only talk, what stories it could tell. And I had the idea for quite some time, and I actually took a few notes about things I thought would be very, very interesting things that this coin might pass through, and that's where the idea came from. I'm sure a lot of people have had the same idea.
I think so, but not everybody writes about it. So how did you go about collecting the stories?
You know, a lot of these are true stories, and I have to admit quite a few of them are autobiographical. I'll admit to some of them, but not to all. I won't confess to all of them. But a lot of them are actually true stories. One of the early stories that you might recall is of three schoolboys that are in grade school that during the noon lunch hour are out behind the school flipping and matching pennies. And during the first class period after the noon hour, the principal calls them into the office and says, I understand you boys have been gambling on school property, to which they all say, no, no, no. And then he says, empty your pockets. And, of course, here come the piles of pennies. Actually, I was one of those boys back in fourth grade that happened to, and I never forgot it.
No, I think a trip to the principal's office in those days would merit that you would keep that memory with you even when you're dead.
Well, what the principal said was, if I ever catch you boys gambling again on school property or anywhere else, first I'm going to call your parents, and then I'm going to call the police. And in those days, getting a call made by the principal to your parents was a very, very severe thing.
Yes.
Whatever punishment the principal could give me would be nothing like my parents would be able to dole out.
Well, that's it. And that's one thing that you did not want to happen. I mean, even in my son's time, and he was born in 73, he told me a trip to the principal was enough to put fear into the heart of every kid in the school.
This is true.
So you then based it on their stories, and the stories are very intriguing, and some of them you can really identify with past the penny, because you brought in some other things that happen to people. Life happens, life gets complicated, and it turns and twists, and you don't know what's going to happen until it happens.
Well, this is true, and a lot of these stories, like I said, are actually true. One of them was a time my wife and I were staying in a hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, and we were in the hotel lounge, and there were two guys behind us discussing just their day-to-day lives, and the one said, well, I quit my job. And his friend says, how come? And he said, I asked for a raise, and they wouldn't give it to me. And his friend said, well, how much did you ask for? And he said, $2 a month. That just flabbergasted me. First of all, that he would ask for a raise of only $2 a month, and then secondly, that he was not valued enough by his employer to actually receive the raise. And that made one of the stories in the book, and I added a little bit to it, but, that's a true story.
Yeah, and people have been fired for less.
Well, I think so.
When I worked as a professional temporary, you wanted a raise, you would ask in so so many cents, because if you looked at how rate increases were done, they were done with dollars and cents. And if they raised you by 25 cents, it would raise it all the way up to where the person who's originally paying for you as a temporary would have to pay more. Yet, I personally never had any trouble, because they said whenever I left a job, they always had to hire 2 or 3 people to cover what I did by myself. So I always got a raise, but it was by 50 cents or 75 cents or even $1. And, yeah, you were playing with God and God deciding whether or not you really deserved getting that rate.
Well, absolutely.
So
when I wrote the book Penny, I wanted to have a very, very special coin rather than just an ordinary coin that would be making its path through the hands of all these people. And I was a little bit familiar with pennies, since I have to admit I'm a penny hoarder. And I have kept every penny I've gotten my hands on. In the last 40 or 45 years, it's the dollars I have trouble hanging on to, but pennies I can keep. And I was familiar with the last true copper penny was minted in the Denver Mint on October 22nd, 1982, and that is the penny, which makes it very, very special. That is the object of the story that passes through all of these hands.
And I think it's important for people to recognize, I mean, I was born during the 50s, and you probably were born during the 40s, but a lot has taken place since the ending of World War II and now. Our country and our currency specifically has gone through a lot of changes. When I hoarded silver dollars, and I have a couple that date back to 1845, 1850. You don't see them anymore. They don't exist. And a lot of them are being saved, like people like me, and occasionally you do get them. But kids today have no concept about the silver dollar. The same thing when they did, I think, for 1 year, a very brief amount of time, brought out the gold dollar. And I have several of them. I think I have 4 or 5 of them, but they don't make those anymore either. I mean the ones that get into general circulation, not the special collector's editions and stuff. And a lot of kids take it for granted that our money has always been impure, not realizing that a lot of our nickel and dimes and quarters were originally pure.
Yes.
And then at a certain time, I mean, I remember when quarters were silver all the way through. And then somewhere, I guess, in the late 50s, early 60s is when they put the copper in. And so were they degrading it, or were they really saving on silver? It's hard to tell. But
well, the same thing happened with the penny, and what makes the penny that is the object of my book, Penny, so unusual is that from 1909, when the Lincoln penny was first made, through October 22nd, 1982, pennies were 95% copper with just a little zinc thrown in. Starting the next day, all pennies are 97.5% zinc with just a little copper thrown in.
And yes.
And throughout the story, our last copper penny that was ever made is a little bit arrogant, a little bit of an elitist, as it looks down on these new zinc pennies that are pathetic and puny in the penny's eyes, and they are lighter. They're about a half a gram lighter than the real copper pennies.
Yes.
So that's what kind of makes the penny in the story unusual. One other thought along the line of coins you're talking about, the wheat penny, the one that has a couple of wheat stalks in the back of the Lincoln penny, was minted from 1909 through 1958. In one's day-to-day business activities, a person might receive hundreds and hundreds of pennies and change in a year's time, but rarely will a person ever find a wheat penny that is minted from 1909 through 1958. And the reason I believe is that, just as you said, when people get their hands on this is an unusual penny these days, so they keep it. And
yes.
I think most people do.
Yes, most people do. And I think after reading your book, they may start looking at their pennies a little bit differently, and they may actually start taking a magnifying glass or a microscope and putting it under and trying to discover how solid our money is, and maybe hopefully start asking questions about the devaluation of our coins and why they are being infiltrated with other types of ingredients or materials than what was originally planned when they were first put into use.
Well, sure. And actually, the book only came out about 3 weeks ago, and it's just getting started into circulation and popularity. But I've had 2 people locally stop me on the streets and say, here's a penny that I found laying on the street. I never picked them up before. In fact, I'm holding a 1970 penny in my hand right here that somebody gave me yesterday. Said, hey, I found this. And so people are becoming a little bit more aware of it. I think that's a great thing.
Well, I think, too, that it gives me some ideas of how to really market the book better so that you can really sort of build a brand about recognizing that you may be holding something that's quite precious. And you should be aware of it, because I think that people take coins, especially pennies, for granted. They really don't think of them as anything special. It's a penny, for God's sake. It's worth 1 cent. And yet I think that people really should pay attention to the coins that they carry around. And those coins are heavy after a while.
This is true. You may recall one of the little incidents in the book was, which happens to a lot of people. A person was coming out of a convenience store. They had a cup of coffee and a donut and their car keys. And this penny got caught in the key ring and fell on the ground in a convenience store parking lot, which happens quite often. And the penny lay there for some time as cars and bicycles and people ran over it and so on. One person looked down, saw it, and said, oh, it's just a penny, which really hurt this penny's attitude,
feelings.
Of course.
Yeah, I would hurt my feelings because nobody is just off.
Yeah, and so that's part of it. And by the way, there are a few pennies that are exceedingly valuable, and what makes a penny valuable is if, when it was minted, something happened that should not have happened. For instance, the copper pennies, which is the subject of the book, were last minted on October 22nd, 1982. After that, the zinc pennies were made. However, I'm told that in 1983, there was still a little copper around, and a few 1983 pennies were actually made of copper. And that penny, if you had one, would be very valuable.
My goodness. Now, that's something, everybody remember that. 1983 pennies are pure copper. And
now,
you should save it.
The way that you would be able to determine it is by the weight. A copper penny is about a half a gram heavier than the zinc penny, so you'd have to have a very sensitive scale. One other thing, there are people that have a more highly tuned ear than me, but I've heard people say that they can flip a penny in the air, let it land on a surface, and that a copper penny will have a little bit of a ring to it, where a zinc penny just lands with a thud. I don't rely on that myself, but there are ways. The weight would be the best way to determine.
Now, that is very, very interesting. I understand from the back of your cover that you've written 27 other books. What are they? The subjects on a general, whatever kind of catches your interest, or do you have a particular niche that you...
I have a master's degree in business, so I wrote a number of books in the business area. One of the books that I'm really, really proud of, I wrote a number of years ago, you're probably familiar with the term shoebox accountant.
Yes.
And what a shoebox accountant is a person that takes all of their financial records, their invoices, check stubs, bills, and so on, and they throw them in a big old shoebox or a basket or a drawer, and at the end of the month or the end of the year or at income tax time, they get it all out, dump it out on the kitchen table and try to sort it out and make some sense out of that mess. I wrote the first ever published shoebox accounting simulation that McGraw-Hill Book Company of New York published. And that was on the market with McGraw-Hill for 25 years, and there still is kind of a cult following of colleges that use it in their accounting classes, and in fact, I publish it for them right now. So that was one. That led to writing a number of college textbooks in accounting and in business math. That was never my path, but one of the world's great publishers asked me if I would write some of those books. I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead.
So you've been very successful with writing nonfiction books for prominent publishers.
Yes, one of my books called Earn Money at Home was published by the trade division of McGraw-Hill, and this was one of the early books on that topic. It's a very, very popular topic now, and there's a lot of books online and so on available. But my Earn Money at Home book that McGraw-Hill published was on the market throughout the country in bookstores for 17 years. That did really well for us. And I wrote a book called How to Sell Your House in Tough Times that Parrot G. Putnam published. That did good for us. I wrote with a friend of mine some children's picture books published by Northwestern Publishing House of Milwaukee. So when opportunities have come along and ideas have kind of popped up regardless of the genre, I've tried to pursue them.
Well, I think you've done an excellent job. So what are you looking for your 29th project?
Well, I have two projects underway. I have a literary agent from San Francisco, and I have a manuscript that is completed. And it is called More Than Just Passing Through, Making Your Mark, Leaving a Legacy, and Going Out with a Bang. And it's for people that have an interest in that their life should be more than just writing their name on a restroom wall, Bubba was here, that for people that want to actually accomplish something and do something and leave a mark on society and leave a legacy behind for others so they have done something and also so that they are not forgotten.
Yeah,
so that's the project that is underway right now.
Yeah, no, I'm working on that. That's what I'm trying to do with my radio station and trying to teach people of how to really make their mark in the world by speaking out and letting people know what's going on.
Well, absolutely. You're making your mark. You've written books of fiction and nonfiction, and you have your radio program, so you've made a great deal of a mark.
Well, I believe that everybody should leave some kind of ripple behind to let people know that they existed. The fact that only kings, queens, emperors, presidents, senators, and congressmen and celebrity stars has that right kind of convinces me that it's the common man who's carrying the world on their shoulders, and this is the person that a new civilization should pay attention to.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that.
And that we are the ones who are really providing the roadways in which future generations are going to be walking down and trying to pick up whatever they can and put it into what they want to take with them into the future. And mostly our audience are millennials, and I'm a firm believer that if you can get them now while they're still very young, you'll have them for the rest of your life. And to me, that's an important detail not to miss.
Well, that is true, and one's legacy doesn't have to be something that is astounding and that shatters the earth.
No.
It can be something simple that makes a strong impact on one's local community or on one's friends and relatives that just does something positive.
Absolutely. And I think that the young teens should be encouraged to do this. Now, I'm not talking to those people who get highlighted or spotlighted on the news program and, look at me, I'm such a wonderful person, this is what I've done. But to kids or other people who really believe what they have should be passed along to somebody else. And if it's going to work or if it's going to be passed from one generation to the next, you don't have to announce it. You don't have to broadcast it. People will pick up on it because
yes, they will.
This is a strong wave or strong energy. You do not need to call attention to yourself. I guess it's basically what I'm trying to say, because you're part of a society that's trying to make things better. I kind of look at society as the way you look at parents. The parents try to provide good structure and discipline and give their kids their experience, so by the time they need to start standing on their feet, they can, and then they can move forward without their parents. And that's pretty much what society and a culture does as well.
Well, that's an excellent point, and that is kind of the purpose of what that manuscript amounts to. And, in fact, my agent and I are going to visit this afternoon about some ideas, and hope we can move that forward, that we can find a publisher for that.
Oh, I think you will, because I think there are a lot of people out there who are hungry for that type of manuscript.
You know, I've done a lot of research on it, and there are books out there on how to make your mark, but they're talking really about how to make it on college entrance exams and things like that. Nothing that really talks specifically about these things that I mentioned, about making your mark on society and leaving a legacy for others, and then going out with a flurry that will knock their socks off and never forget you.
Exactly. And I think that people feel like they need to do feats of adventure or feats of magnitude that will supersede everybody else. But that's not what you're really talking about. You're talking about the inner person. And this
is true.
And the inner, what I call somebody's soul, and having it really become more fluid and go out behind them to keep on spurring society to keep moving forward. And that's completely different from what a lot of books are, because most of the books that are out there always talk about the one thing, how to win, how to be number one. And it's not the number ones or how to win that you're talking about in your manuscript, and that's the biggest difference.
In my book, Penny, it deals with the penny passes through the hands of ordinary people, and the famous, the infamous, the saints and the sinners, and it hangs out in churches and honky-tonks and everywhere in between, and it crisscrosses the United States all the way from the Midwest, well, from Denver, where it starts out at the Mint, to the Midwest, to California, eventually to the Deep South and into New York City and into New England. So it crisscrosses, and as it goes through, these are people that all have a story. They're all trying to make their mark on society somehow or the other, and many times the penny is, of course, there observing and make some comments about the individual or about the situation that occurred.
I hope that you get this book translated as well, because
I would love it.
Because I think that other countries will recognize the importance of their small change and what has happened to their small change, and will also make a difference to them and how they view their change. So I really like that idea.
Canada, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Canada has done away with the penny, and they round off to the nearest nickel. And in the United States, it has been proposed more than once that the penny be eliminated. And in fact, in the book Penny, as you might recall, it does end up on the U.S. Senate floor where there is a proposal to eliminate the pennies. And there is some good information that is presented there. And, of course, there's a great deal of opposition to it, but there's a lot of people that support getting rid of the penny. I would hate to see that happen because I'm kind of a fan of the penny.
Well, I kind of like Abraham Lincoln, you know.
Yes.
I have a lot of respect for that gentleman. Peter, could you please tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, where they can find your book, Penny, and your other business books, should they also be interested in them?
Well, the name of the book is Penny, and the subtitle is Hands I Passed Through, Things I Saw, Stories I Can Tell. It is by me, Peter Davidson. It is available online from Amazon.com, BarnesNoble.com. It's available through distributors, so any brick-and-mortar store would be able to get them through a book distributor, and that would be a good way to get them. And really, if somebody wanted to contact me directly, I am very happy to hear from people. And my email address is peterdavidson@mchsi.com, peterdavidson@mchsi.com. I am pleased to hear from people, and I always answer.
Great. Well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Peter Davidson, author of the book Penny, Hands I Passed Through, Things I Saw, Stories I Can Tell. You can hear this interview all over again at https://Passionate World Radio Network, twitter.com/@Caldwell, CAULDWELL, Facebook.com/PWR Network LLC, YouTube.com/PWR Network LLC, GooglePlus.com/PWR Network LLC. Thank you all very much for listening. And before you go away and stray, Watts had this to say about treachery. Nothing tends so much to enlarge the mind as traveling. That is, making visits to other towns, cities, or countries besides those in which we were born and educated. I guess that's about travel. Okay. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, to become successful, one must put themselves in the path of a giant. Passionate World Radio Network. Thank you and have a good night.